Hello, great souls. Welcome to our Living Yoga Satsang, reflections on Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's take a moment together to begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yoganandaji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Help us to dive deeply into these teachings, to receive the blessings offered us this day. Help us to awaken to our own divine reality and to be a blessing, carrying this divine energy, this divine love, this healing presence to all. Om, peace. Amen. Okay, so we are on chapter 13 today. And this is a really beautiful, delightful, and rich chapter. It's entitled The Sleepless Saint. And Yogananda, it's, again, I just enjoy his writing so much and the way that he talks about himself and his journey and how he just creates this opportunity by offering an example for us of the things that we run into as seekers of truth. And so today in the chapter, what he's talking about is that he gets to a point, he said he was in the ashram for about 6 months, and he became restless. He became impatient, a little tired of the hermitage duties and his college studies, and he began to feel this desire to go to the Himalayas, which had been within him always, right? He before he found his guru, he was, as you may recall from previous chapters, these various flights to the Himalayas that he took trying to attain God realization. It's understood in India that great saints and yogis live in the Himalayas. So it's understandable that Yogananda would feel that if he went there, he could find a saint and have a place to meditate. So, you know, it was very understandable in the context of India. That being said, he was with his guru, and he knew he was with his guru. So he forgives himself by saying he had only been there 6 months, and he didn't fully understand the stature of Sri Yukteswar, which is interesting because on the one hand, he understood it to be his guru. He knew him. Again, in previous chapters, he's talking to him saying he wants God realization. But this is what can happen for us, that we feel like on one hand, we know something is right for us. We know it's our source. We know it's the place, the person that will is right for us and has everything we need. And then we can begin to feel restless and have an idea come into our mind that doesn't seem like we're rejecting what we have. It doesn't seem like it to us. It seems like I'm not rejecting it. I'm just wanting to improve it. Or, and it's such an interesting. It's such an interesting, not easy, is really what I want to say. It's not easy for us to navigate our spiritual life because the desire to seek elsewhere isn't necessarily the wrong desire. It could be exactly the right choice. So, you know, and somewhere else in here, I'm certain that Yogananda will talk about that. Right? So I know that Swami Kriyananda talked about it. One of his famous lines is that, you know, we want to be open and receptive to spiritual teachings, but we don't want to be so open-minded that our brains fall out. That's one of his humorous comments, that you really need to develop intuition. You need to develop a sense of inner resonance with what you're doing. Because something else that Swami Kriyananda talked about with intuition is we want to always be listening for guidance. You may feel very strongly guided in a direction, and that could be with teachings, with a teacher, with a situation, and then you're guided in a new direction, and it's the right thing. It's the right thing for you. So how do we know? How do we know? Well, that really takes time and deep discernment, and what I have found for myself, a willingness to test it out. And this is what Swami talks about. You know, over time, as you develop a relationship with trusted friends, divine friends, and trusted guides, teachers, teachings, you can have that as a touchstone to, you know, you're feeling guided in a particular way, and then check it out with your teachers, with your friends, who you trust their counsel. Now, sometimes you'll feel guided in a way and you have to go on your own. You don't have someone who can perfectly match through agreement your guidance. What I have found, though, is that those who, I've shared this story in a previous talk, when my husband James and I radically changed our lives. We changed our work. I was teaching yoga, meditation, spiritual counseling. He was a corporate executive. We lived on the East Coast then. We grew up out here in the Bay Area. But we were really feeling a divine call to re-examine our lives. And we sensed we'd not realized our potential, especially in our marriage. We hadn't realized it. So professionally, personally, our lives, I mean, they were wonderful. They were wonderful. They really were great. But our relationship, it's hard to put it to words other than we both had always felt there was a potential in our coming together, and the life we had wasn't going to get us there. And I believe that today because we both feel like we're living it. The potential's still unfolding. So we're not at the end, but we're definitely on the right track. And for a long time now, we have felt, yes, this is what we needed. This is our own souls understood this, but it was a huge risk, and it was, boy, it could have turned out very poorly. So I had shared, you can go back to previous talks to find that conversation. But ultimately, what both James and I had to do was stand in our own truth, and really a sense of inner autonomy around this. We feel this is the right thing. And part of what I mentioned in that previous talk is a very good friend of mine in Ananda, a minister and senior teacher, initially wasn't sure about my decision, but in the course of our conversation, he was sure about me. So he said, you know, maybe it is the right thing, because I was so solid. And then I went home and talked to James. I thought, boy, I better be sure about this. And James stood up strongly. Later, Asha told me, you know, that's a good thing. Sometimes we need opposition to really understand where we stand. So there you go. You know, how do we navigate this? In this case, Yogananda, it was an error on his part. He had an idea that unbroken silence in the Himalayas, a romantic notion, right? That's what he needed to progress spiritually. And his guru said to him, you know, really, you will get further by being in the presence of someone who's God realized than by going to a mountain, right? A mountain itself can't give you God realization. He was really saying, I'm God realized. You know, if you stay with me, it's going to be the better choice. But he didn't say that. He said, as Yogananda said, he hinted at it by giving him that sentence. And Yogananda persisted, and Sri Yukteswar didn't say anything else. And Yogananda said that he interpreted the silence to be the agreement, which is a dangerous thing that devotees can do. And it is, right? As Swami has told the story, and Asha witnessed this, being his secretary for many years, that Asha would watch Swami give feedback to people, and then she'd hear it, and they would leave and hear something different. And she'd think, how did that happen? 'Cause, didn't we hear the same thing? One thing Swami said is that if someone asked for his blessing, he always gave his blessing because he blessed them. Right? He may not have believed in their choice in terms of it being the right choice for them, and if they asked specifically, he would tell someone. But he practiced in yamas and niyamas truthfulness. In the yoga teaching, truth is beneficial. So it's very different than factual. It's not dishonest, but what you navigate is it helpful for this individual for me to say this? I was speaking with a student one time who had been referred to me because he was struggling with addiction. And for some of you may know, I have a history, I'm in recovery myself for many years, and I teach a program called Yoga and the 12 Steps, which is about recovery. And so he was referred to me, and I was meeting with him. He was trying to understand what was true. Was it really addiction that he was struggling with? What was his truth? So in the course of our meeting, we met for a little while. It was also recommended to him that he go to an outpatient treatment center that focused on addiction in the 12 steps. And so he had started doing that as well. So he was meeting with me, he was going there, and one of our conversations, he was telling me all the reasons, not all the reasons. He was presenting it as all of the challenging consequences, a simpler way to say that is problems, that his drug use was causing, drinking and cocaine. So that those two substances were causing a lot of problems in his life. And so he was listing that for me one day. We were talking about it, he was listing it. So after kind of telling me various scenarios in which cocaine use and alcohol had caused some serious problems for him, he finished by saying, therefore, I'm not sure that I'm an addict. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting, because from my own history with addiction and where I'm sitting, I thought what he was telling me is all the reasons he understood he was an addict, but that wasn't true for him. So I said, oh, okay. And then he said, well, what do you think? And what I felt in that moment, and this also comes from my 12-step background, it's really not my place to tell anybody that they're an addict. I can't tell someone they're an addict or an alcoholic. I could say, it reminds me of myself, and I'm a recovering addict. I'm a recovering alcoholic. It reminds me of others I know who identify as that and are in recovery, or maybe struggling, but who identify with that. That would be truthful. I could say that. What I felt to say in that moment was when he said, well, what do you think? And I said, I think you're unsure about whether you're an addict. And he said, yeah, that was true, right? I felt like that was true. That's what I was hearing. And that you are, and then I added, you are really exploring that. And you're looking at the various things that have happened in consequence to using cocaine, using alcohol. You can see that. And I probably retold some of that. Right? There was a lot there. And he was taking that in as I retold him. You were saying this to me and this to me. And so when you look at all of that, you're not sure. Maybe that means you're an addict, maybe not. And that was his truth. That was really his truth. And I could feel, and I sensed in that moment, the most supportive thing I could do was give him the space he needed to find his truth. It's again, I wasn't, I was with him in the journey. That was my role. He was coming for help, getting clear himself. And eventually, for himself, he did come to identify as having addiction. But it took time for him. It took the other program that he was in. It took conversations of exploration. And I'm mentioning this because when Swamiji has said in our practice with truthfulness, we really need to pay attention to the receptivity of others. I've talked about this in some previous conversations. It's a very deep yogic and spiritual principle that we, whenever we're in a role of supporting someone else, teaching or supporting or counseling, we are listening for their receptivity and openness to what we're sharing. This is very important. Someone was asking me recently if they were very excited about a book they read that was strengthening their yoga practice. And so they know that I teach yoga, so they were chatting with me. It was wonderful, delightful conversation. I hadn't seen them in a long time because of COVID. And so we happened to run into each other, and there we were, social distance, but able to chat a little bit. And he said, you know, the interesting thing is no one I know cares about this information, right? It was just, for him, it was just this huge awakening and aha. He couldn't believe, but every person he talked to, they weren't all that interested. And I just chuckled when he said that. And he said, has that happened to you? Have you found that you'll be very, very excited or enthusiastic about something and try to tell people and you know, you get a lot of pushback? And what I told him is that with my background in 12 steps, the practice within the 12-step community, which is also yoga, in 12 steps they say attraction rather than promotion. So better you stay on your path, you walk your path, and let it be attractive to someone else. And if it's attractive and they're interested and they're receptive, you can share. But don't go out proselytizing. It's not a good idea to promote what you're doing, because if someone's not receptive, you can actually you can close someone off. And this is a yoga teaching as well, that if you try to give information, spiritual information, before someone is genuinely interested, curious, receptive, what can happen is that they'd have to push back because they don't want it. And now a dynamic has been created within them that when they would be ready, they have a hurdle to get over. And it's unfortunate. So part of what we want to do when we're sharing is to be really discerning about someone's interest, right? So here, Sri Yukteswar, he's giving the information, but Yogananda wasn't receptive. He didn't want that information. So Sri Yukteswar didn't say anything. So he said that, all right, very well. He put up no argument about it. Oh, good, okay, so off he goes. And then the rest of the chapter, he has this, humorous and insightful, deep story of his way of getting to the Himalayas. Now, before he leaves, he goes to a friend to ask about a saint that he knows of, this friend knows, because he feels that, well, if he can see this saint as he's going into the Himalayas, he'll feel a special blessing. It'll kind of bless his time. And part of that being this undercurrent feeling that probably his guru didn't say, oh yes, I think that's a great idea. So this was a way for him, he said, to kind of feel better about his decision. So on his way, he goes and he comes to a famous temple in India that he said it's a temple that's like Lourdes for Catholics. So, and even non-Catholics, you may have heard of Lourdes in France, which is a famous healing sacred place where the Virgin Mother, Mary, appeared. So this temple had many healings have happened. And even in his own family, someone experienced a miraculous story of healing. His aunt went there for 7 days and fasted and appeared on the 7th day, in her hand an herb appeared. And she went home and made a tea, and she gave it to her husband, who was suffering with a very serious illness, and he was healed. So Yogananda was aware of the power of this temple, and he goes to it, and the only symbol that it has of divinity is this large sphere, which is representing no beginning and no end, so infinity. And Yogananda goes, and he was in such he said he was in such an austere mood that he decided, he scoffed at it, and he felt like, symbols aren't important, outer symbols. It's inner communion that really matters. And he refused to bow at the symbol. He went to the temple, he had this prideful attitude and left. Well, then he tells stories of, asking for directions, getting completely lost, being told the wrong way to go. And it was quite difficult. So eventually, he has this miraculous encounter with the saint. And again, if you haven't read the chapter, I highly recommend it. It's just this beautiful, after all these bad directions, and he's beginning to feel like, I'm never going to get there. The saint appears to him. And the saint chastises him a little bit to say, where is God? What is God? I mean, first the saint reveals himself by letting Yogananda know, giving information that Yogananda realizes, oh, this is the saint. And I know he's the saint because he's sharing information that someone would have to have advanced spiritual stature to know this information. And then the saint is asking him a question, where is God? And Yogananda said, well, God's everywhere, right? He said, oh, okay, that's interesting. So why then didn't you bow at the temple when you were there? Which again astonished Yogananda. How did he know I didn't bow at the temple? And he said, the saint in correcting him said, the devotee gets fixed on his own path towards the divine and becomes closed to other paths. And it's not right. God is infinite, and there are many ways to find God. So it's not the right attitude to feel like with pride you have found the way, and any other way is beneath you. And Yogananda understood, he heard that. He understood, oh, okay, I was wrong. So then he tells an amazing story of being with the saint and having a miraculous experience of inner light with him. And the saint also said to him, I could give you God realization, but it's not mine to give you. That's your guru's to give you, and you need to go back to him. You do not need to be in the Himalayas meditating. That's not where you need to be. You've already found your path to God, and you need to go back to that. And Yogananda, again, could feel the truth of it. So the saint was kindly to him. He softened to him and actually gave him a miraculous healing the next morning before he parted, and sent him with blessing back to Sri Yukteswar. So it's delightful, it's touching, it's deep, and it's meaningful because we encounter these kinds of experiences in our journey, our spiritual journey. What's the right path for me? Would this, whatever this is, would that be helpful? Is that what I need? I'm reminded of a creativity teacher, Julia Cameron. You may have heard of her. She wrote very famously The Artist's Way. And Julia, one of the things that she talks about in how people get into trouble on their creative journey is they come up with notions that are false. And they feel that, oh, this is what I need. And so she said, people often feel like they need a year uninterrupted in order to write a book. But more often than not, that blocks them more than supports them. So she has all of these wonderful, if you haven't read the book and you're inspired at all to read it, I recommend it. She has many, many daily, practical, useful tools for cultivating creativity in the midst of life. And it's not that it would be wrong to take time, but what you want to do is check your notions about it. Is it true? And this is an example, right? Where here's a creativity teacher saying, most often it's a false notion. It's not needed at all. If you can learn how to do it in your daily life, you're more likely to be creative and profoundly creative than, quitting your job and going away and living in a remote area. That being said, I also know Asha, when she was finishing her book about Swami Kriyananda, that is a huge volume, Light Bearer, amazing book about Ananda and Swami, and from Asha's, who was with him, 50 years. So she had to go away at the end. So she realized she needed seclusion in order to write that book. She'd done a lot prior to heading there. She had all her notes and everything she'd been gathering. Sometimes it is the right thing. So how do we know? By listening deeply, checking it out, exploring, and just watching within ourselves, the practice of wisdom and discrimination, and then testing it to see what's the result of my choice. Do I feel like, and especially if I'm inviting the universe to give me feedback, what I have found is I receive it. I receive it. So it gives me confidence also in making choices, because the idea isn't to be afraid to take a step, right? Or to always be looking outside myself for someone else to validate, yes, this is the right choice. I go within first. I pray and meditate about it. I often write about it. I'll be in conversation with God about it, inviting the masters, and then I'm checking it out, and then I'm looking for the results. So what comes to mind in this moment, I'll finish with this. Yoga was that in my life. When yoga, I had heard of yoga for so many years. In sobriety, I'd heard of it, like it would be a good idea. I always sensed it was a good idea. Eventually, I was like, okay, now's the time. And I ended up at a retreat with Ananda. James and I were living in the Midwest then, and we were in Chicago, just outside of the city, and I got a flyer for a retreat in Kentucky. And the flyer came in the mail, and I knew, I need to go. So anyways, that retreat changed the course of my life and my spiritual life. And what happened when I was there, which was radical for me, is I could feel my guru, which is Jesus, awakening me to Yogananda and telling me, study with this master. Relate to this master as if he was your guru, as if he was, give to him everything you give to me, your dedication, your loyalty, your commitment. And this is the path to deepen your relationship with me. So I knew it to be true in every fiber of my being from my experience on that retreat. But I'll tell you, it was quite a journey for me to say yes. I did say yes because I felt it was Jesus guiding me to say yes. I was committed to him, so okay. But boy, I hope I'm not wrong. And I had to live with that, not in a fearful way, but I would just continually bring it back to him at certain points, certain decision points, including, last week I talked about discipleship, including discipleship to this path, right? Jesus is one of the gurus on this path, but discipleship to Yogananda, like, okay, wow, how is it that these two masters are working together for my salvation? I can't explain it, but I know it in my soul to be true. And that takes a lot of confidence and nurturing and testing. So the fruits have proven themselves thus far, right? So I'm staying on the path with that, but I'm smiling about it. But it's true that part of the practice is daily, right? So the confidence comes from a lot of experience, a lot of positive fruit from the experience, and it's fresh every day that I'm growing still in the experience. So this is our talk for today. It's great to be with you, and I invite you to be listening for false notions and possible corrections that come your way, and allow yourself to be surprised by that which will deeply nourish you in your spiritual life. Until next time, great